called and he said, we're all set for the Save America Act. He was pushing the Save America Act like crazy. He got back, said he just landed from Ukraine. I said, that's a long trip to make it. He said, he sounded a little tired. Perfect, but a little bit tired.
On July 11th, 2026, Senator Lindsey Graham made one phone call after landing from a grueling trip to Ukraine. The person on the other end was Donald Trump.
I want to pay my respects to Lindsey, who was our friend. He was a great guy. He was a great politician, actually. And it's hard to believe he's gone. He spoke to me just before he passed away, just to say hello. He got back. He felt fine. He was a little tired.
Graham sounded tired but sharp, pushing legislation until his final breath. Hours later, emergency responders broke down the deadbolted door of his Capitol Hill home to find the 71-year-old senator in cardiac arrest. For Baz, Trump said nothing about him. Then, when he finally broke his silence about Lindsey Graham, his words stunned even those who thought they knew their relationship. The night everything changed. On Friday, July 10th, 2026, Lindsey Graham was photographed standing beside Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv during his 10th visit to Ukraine since the Russian invasion. He flew back to Washington the next day, landed sometime in the late afternoon, and before he even had time to settle in at home, he picked up the phone and called the President of the United States. That is who Lindsey Graham was, and if you have followed American politics for any amount of time, you already know that the man simply could not stop working. Trump described the call in detail during a phone interview with NBC's Meet the Press the following morning. He said Graham was not talking about his health or his exhaustion from a grueling overseas trip. Graham was talking about the Save America Act, a voter identification bill he had co-sponsored that would require proof of citizenship to register for federal elections. Trump recalled that Graham told him they were all set for the bill and that he was pushing it aggressively. Trump said he told Graham they would get it done together. What stayed with Trump was how normal the call felt. He said Graham sounded a little tired, but described him as otherwise perfect. Graham told him the fatigue was just from the long flight, and Trump said he knew Graham well enough that if something were seriously wrong, Graham would have let him know. They even discussed the possibility of meeting the following day. Nothing about that conversation suggested it would be the last one they would ever have. Within roughly 90 minutes, Graham called his own scheduler and said he was experiencing severe chest pains. Senator Tommy Tuberville later revealed that one of his own staffers happened to be with Graham's scheduler at the time and heard the exchange. When the scheduler asked Graham if he had called 911, Graham said no. That was the reason he was calling her. A woman who was not at the residence, reportedly traveling from Baltimore at the time, placed the 911 call on his behalf. DC Fire and EMS dispatched responders to Graham's home on South Capitol Street at approximately 8:30 in the evening. When they arrived, the front door was deadbolted, and nobody answered. They had to force their way inside. About 25 minutes later, radio dispatch confirmed that responders were performing CPR on a man in his 70s who had gone into full cardiac arrest. Paramedics loaded Graham into an ambulance and rushed him to George Washington University Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 10:23 that night. The medical examiner's preliminary report identified the cause as aortic dissection due to arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Trump said he received a message from someone in Graham's office at around 1 in the morning, confirming that the senator had died. He told CNN later that day that he simply could not believe it, and that Graham had been like a member of the family to him. Graham had been scheduled to appear on Meet the Press that Sunday for what would have been his 64th appearance on the program. Instead, the show opened with the announcement of his death, and the grief Trump expressed in those early hours would have been absolutely unthinkable just a decade earlier, because these two men were not always allies. They were not always friends. They were, in fact, locked in one of the most vicious feuds in modern Republican primary history. Enemies on national television. Most people over the age of 50 will remember the 2015 Republican presidential primary as one of the most chaotic and crowded fields in American political history. More than a dozen candidates were competing for the nomination, And Lindsey Graham was one of them. Trump was widely considered a novelty act at the time, a businessman who would generate headlines and then fade. Graham clearly saw Trump as something far more dangerous. In December 2015, Graham went on CNN and said that the way to make America great again was to tell Donald Trump to go to hell. After Trump proposed banning all Muslims from entering the country, Graham called him a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He warned his own party in the starkest possible terms that if Republicans nominated Trump, they would be destroyed, and that they would deserve it. Trump, as anyone who has watched him for more than 5 minutes could have predicted, responded with escalating personal attacks. He called Graham a lightweight, an idiot, a disgrace, and one of the dumbest human beings he had ever seen, all in front of rally crowds in South Carolina, which was Graham's home state. But the moment that turned their feud into a piece of political folklore happened on July 21, 2015, in Bluffton, South Carolina. Just one day after Graham called Trump a jackass on cable news, Trump stood in front of more than 500 people, pulled out a piece of paper, and read Lindsey Graham's personal cell phone number on live national television. He encouraged the crowd to call the number. Graham's Senate office confirmed it was real. The voicemail filled within minutes, and Graham eventually tweeted that he was probably getting a new phone. What makes this even more surreal is that at Graham's funeral on July 28, 2026, Trump brought up this exact moment from the pulpit of Washington National Cathedral. He admitted he should not have done it. And then, standing in front of cabinet members, world leaders, and grieving family, he read the number out loud again. The room laughed. Trump said Graham had told him he had kept that number for 20 years, and that after Trump shared it, the phone exploded. Graham dropped out of the presidential race in December 2015 and refused to vote for Trump or Hillary Clinton in the general election. At the end of 2016, nobody in Washington appeared further from Trump's inner circle than Lindsey Graham. And yet, within months of Trump's inauguration, the man who told Americans to send Trump to hell was playing golf with the new president and building a political partnership that would reshape the Republican Party for the next decade. The Kavanaugh defense that changed everything. After Trump took office in 2017, Graham did something that stunned both their inner circles. He started showing up. He visited the White House. He played round after round of golf with the president. He began positioning himself as a bridge between the Senate Republican establishment and the unpredictable new administration. The two men discovered they shared common ground on judicial appointments, national security, and foreign policy, and the alliance grew quietly at first. Trump himself marveled at the transformation during a 2018 meeting with Senate Republicans. He said in front of the room that Lindsey used to be a great enemy and had become a great friend, and that he genuinely liked him and could not believe he was saying it. Graham smiled and told Trump they had something in common because he liked himself too. But the single event that turned cautious cooperation into a deep personal bond was the Kavanaugh confirmation hearing on September 27, 2018. Christine Blasey Ford had testified that Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her when they were teenagers. Kavanaugh denied the allegation. The hearing had descended into chaos, and Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee were panicking because the momentum had shifted decisively against the nominee. Then Graham got his 5 minutes of questioning time, and he tore the room apart. Instead of deferring to the outside prosecutor the Republicans had brought in, Graham turned directly toward the Democratic side of the committee and unleashed a fury that nobody in that chamber was prepared for. He accused Democrats of orchestrating a campaign to destroy Kavanaugh's life in order to hold the Supreme Court seat open until the next election. He called the entire process the most unethical sham he had witnessed in his political career. He told Kavanaugh directly that he had nothing to apologize for. And then, in a display of the independence that always ran underneath his partisan loyalty, Graham told Kavanaugh that the next time he saw Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, to tell them Lindsey said hello because he had voted for both of them. That speech galvanized Republican support and helped deliver Trump one of his most important Supreme Court appointments. Trump later called it a top 10, maybe top 5 moment in the history of the Senate. At the funeral, standing over Graham's casket, Trump went even further and called it Graham's finest hour and one of the most monumental moments in Senate history. For those who were watching politics in 2018, that Kavanaugh hearing was the moment you knew Graham had crossed a line he could never uncross. And Trump never forgot it. The trust built in that hearing room carried them through years of legislative battles, foreign policy disagreements, and the single most explosive crisis their friendship would ever face. Count me out, and the call that came 40 minutes later. January 6, 2021, broke a lot of things in Washington, and for a few hours it looked like it might have broken the bond between Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham. After the Capitol was stormed and the building was eventually cleared by authorities, senators returned to the chamber to resume the certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory. Graham stood up and delivered an emotional speech that felt to everyone watching like a man saying goodbye to his closest political ally. His voice cracked as he said that he and Trump had been on a hell of a journey together and that he hated for it to end this way. He acknowledged Trump as a consequential president, but said that on that day all he could say was, "Count me out. Enough is enough." According to Trump, the entire break lasted approximately 40 minutes. In a Fox and Friends interview after Graham's death, Trump said Graham called him roughly 40 minutes after the Senate floor speech. Trump claimed Graham asked whether he had really said those things, seemed shocked at his own words, and essentially took it all back. Trump said he gave Graham 99 out of 100 as a result, because many other allies earned a perfect 100, but Graham had that one little moment. It is worth noting that this account cannot be independently verified because Graham is no longer alive to give his version. What is documented, however, is that by May of 2021, just 4 months after January 6th, Graham publicly declared that the Republican Party could not grow without Donald Trump, and that moving forward without him was simply not an option. He visited Trump at Mar-a-Lago, resumed the phone calls, and went right back to his role as one of the president's most visible defenders. He never endorsed the pardoning of Capitol rioters and continued to call January 6th one of the worst days in American history. But he made his political calculation and stuck with it until his final breath. The loyalty ran both directions. It was personal, rooted in a childhood that most people in Washington never fully understood. The pool hall, the orphan, and the putter at the bedside. At Washington National Cathedral, Trump spent a significant portion of his 14-minute eulogy on the part of Graham's life that most of his colleagues in the Senate never experienced firsthand. Graham grew up in central South Carolina, a small town where his parents ran a bar and pool hall on Main Street. The family lived in a room in the back. Trump recalled that Graham's father taught him the 2 keys to running a successful bar. You had to be funny enough that people would keep coming back, and you had to be tough enough to stay in business. Trump told the mourners that for his entire career, that was exactly who Lindsey Graham was. The first person to make you laugh, and one of the last people you ever truly wanted to fight. Trump shared a story about young Graham's earliest lesson in diplomacy. When the wife of a regular patron called the bar demanding to know where her husband was, the man told young Lindsey to say he was not there. Graham picked up the phone and said to the woman, "He said to tell you that he is not here." That kind of accidental honesty followed Graham through every phase of his career. The eulogy became deeply emotional when Trump described the losses that shaped Graham as a man. At just 20 years old, Graham lost his mother to cancer. 15 months later, his father died. Their deaths left his 13-year-old sister Darlene as an orphan. Graham became her legal guardian while still attending college and raised her. Trump said that Graham always maintained that for all his political achievements, his proudest accomplishment was how well Darlene turned out. And there was a weight in Trump's voice when he said it that no amount of political performance could fake. Then Trump shared a detail that cut through every layer of Washington posturing. Graham carried his father's putter in his golf bag for his entire life and wore a ring that had belonged to his mother. Trump said both the putter and the ring were at Graham's bedside on the night he died. He never went anywhere without them. For a man who spent 3 decades navigating the most powerful rooms on the planet, the things closest to him at the very end were the things his parents left behind in a small-town pool hall. Trump did not soften Graham's legacy at the funeral. He stood at the podium and told the assembled mourners that Graham was extremely hawkish and that he never saw a war he did not like. The room absorbed the statement, and then Trump added that only Graham's true friends would understand what that really meant, because everything Graham did militarily was driven by a genuine belief that America's destiny was to win, and that his personal job was to make sure America's enemies would lose. Graham served 33 years in uniform across the Air Force Reserve, and Air National Guard, including years when he was simultaneously holding elected office. He visited nearly every country on the planet during his Senate career, confronting foreign leaders with the kind of blunt, unfiltered energy that most diplomats would consider career-ending. When he met Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi in a tent in the desert, Graham told him he had expected something out of the Arabian Nights and that the setup looked more like a Winnebago. When he met the Dalai Lama, he looked him in the eyes and asked if he could really levitate. Trump noted at the funeral that neither leader was particularly pleased. The reality of Graham's absence was already reshaping the Senate before the funeral flowers had wilted, and Trump was already moving to make sure the Graham name survived. The legacy that refuses to end. Graham's death hit the Senate Republican caucus at the worst possible time. He had already won the June 2026 Republican primary and was running for a 5th term. Graham had served as Budget Committee chairman and had personally shepherded the passage of what Trump called the largest tax cuts in American history through the Big Beautiful Bill. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster appointed Darlene Graham to fill the remainder of her brother's term on July 13th. She was sworn in on July 14th, just 3 days after his death, becoming South Carolina's first female senator. Darlene had never held public office and had spent her career working as an optician and at various state agencies. Trump immediately endorsed her for a full 6-year term, writing on Truth Social that he had asked Darlene to run for the good of the nation and that nobody would be better suited to honor her brother's legacy. On Fox News, Darlene told Sean Hannity that she had made her decision and she was in. At the cathedral, Trump said he had no doubt that Graham was looking down, beaming with pride at his sister, Senator Darlene Graham. He quoted scripture, saying that blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. Trump said that for 71 years, Lindsey Graham was strong and steadfast as a brother, a senator, a warrior, and a patriot, and that he had withstood every test. He said Graham now wears the crown of life in heaven, reunited with his parents and reunited with his Lord. The president stepped away from the podium, and the cathedral fell into silence until the choir began to sing. The man who told America to send Donald Trump to hell spent his final phone call on Earth working with that same president to pass legislation for the country they both swore to serve. Their friendship began with a leaked phone number and ended with a phone call that neither of them knew would be the last. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us what part of their story surprised you the most.